in response to the stick shaker. Captain Marvin Renslow should have pushed the column forward to bring the nose down and gain speed. But for some reason, he did the exact opposite.
We found that the crew, instead of pushing forward, which is the normal response to a stick shaker triggering, the crew was actually pulling back on the controls.
This had the effect of pulling the nose up, causing the airspeed to drop, and tipping the aircraft into an actual stall. Captain Renslow had apparently mishandled one of the most elemental piloting maneuvers: how to recover from a stall. Above everything, it requires gaining airspeed to get out of the red.
The recovery procedure is fairly simple and straightforward. It requires pushing forward on the controls and adding full power. At any point in time, had the captain pushed forward on those flight controls, he had a reasonably good chance of recovering quickly.
From everything we've gained, that stall was recoverable on a repeated number of levels on a repeated basis. There was no reason for that plane to go down.
Investigators also learned that First Officer Shaw, in trying to help Renslow deal with the crisis, inadvertently made things worse.
I put the flaps up!
She retracted the flaps, reducing the amount of lift as the plane struggled to stay in the air.
Had the first officer simply called out, "You're stalled," advanced the power, pushed the nose over, the airplane would have been able to recover.
From a human point of view, it's sad to recognize that those sorts of things happened and the tragedy that came from that.
It's concluded that Captain Renslow's failure to properly respond to the stall warning was the primary cause of the crash of Flight 3407. As the issue is now pilot error, rather than mechanical failure, human performance investigator Evan Byrne is brought on board. His first question: why hadn't either Renslow or Shaw noticed that their airspeed was too low for the icy conditions?
In this case, we can look back towards the fact that there were clear and conspicuous cues of the deteriorating airspeed that were not heeded by the captain.
Byrne listens to the cockpit voice recording to try to understand what might have led to that oversight.
Exactly. Where you could be home with your husband to take care of and all that stuff.
He learns that the crew had been talking throughout the flight. The conversation continued during the landing approach. It's a violation of a rule known as the sterile cockpit, which bans non-essential conversation during critical phases of the flight.
Yeah, you're gonna be upgraded in 6 months.
Blah, blah, blah.
Quite simply, it prohibits conversations that aren't related to the operation of the flight.
Let's do a descent checklist, please. We can do the approach checklist along with it.
Yeah, sure. Bug set?
Byrne also discovers that because of the cockpit banter, the crew performed critical checklists and briefings late.
Transfer off, hydraulic pressure and quantity.
Distracted, the crew likely didn't see the red bar, indicating they were flying too slowly for the conditions the plane had been configured for.
On approach checklist complete.
Rock and roll.
When crews deviate from standard operating procedures and perform checklists late or don't make the required callouts, they become more vulnerable to subtle mistakes that they may make inadvertently that could lead to startle and surprise or unanticipated events that they have to respond to.
The evidence is unequivocal. The crew of Flight 3407 was badly distracted throughout the approach.
Came in when we interviewed, and he said, yeah, you're gonna be upgraded in 6 months.
They had forgotten a key setting they had made that required them to fly faster than normal. They had missed indications that they were flying too slow for icing conditions. Then Captain Renslow had reacted incorrectly to a stall warning, sealing the fate of the plane. Evan Byrne wonders, what could have caused a trained airline flight crew to have made such missteps? He finds a clue on the cockpit voice recording.
Excuse me.
The crew was showing signs of fatigue. Could Renslow and Shaw have been too tired to function effectively on the flight deck? It's a tough question. Answering it will require tracking their movements during the 72 hours leading up to the crash.
It's basic gumshoe detective work in the investigation where we're trying to collect as many facts as we can.
Byrne interviews the families of the pilots.
Could I speak to Mrs. Renslow, please?
He studies the pilots' cell phone bills and records of text messages. He searches the airline's computer system to determine if and when the crew used it to check their schedules. He needs to track their every move.
And what time did Rebecca leave the house?
We're talking to colleagues or other pilots, check airmen, instructors, and we ask all those people about the pilots, about their recent activities.
He learns that neither pilot actually lived anywhere near Newark, but could not afford to stay in hotels on their salaries. Captain Renslow was earning $60,000 annually at Colgan Air. First Officer Shaw was being paid less than $16,000 a year, substantially less than an average bus driver. As a result, both pilots had made long cross-country commutes to Newark, Captain Renslow from his home in Florida, and Rebecca Shaw from Seattle, Washington. In fact, Shaw had commuted all night from Seattle on a cargo flight that connected through Memphis. Captain Renslow had spent the night in the airline's crew lounge at Newark Airport, after having already worked 2 days. He was seen sleeping on a couch in the lounge. It was against company rules, but pilots who couldn't afford housing near the airport did it anyway. Records show that at 3:10 a.m. the morning of the crash, Renslow was awake. He checked his work schedule on the airline's computer network.
Next stop, Buffalo.
At 7:29 a.m., Rebecca Shaw sent a text message to her husband, telling him she'd arrived safely in Newark.
Hi, honey, it's me.
Phone records indicate that later in the morning, Captain Renslow was on the phone several times. Rebecca Shaw was noticed having a nap, catching up on the rest she'd lost flying in the night before.
It's not a lot of sleep.
We ultimately concluded that it was likely that both crew members were experiencing some effects of fatigue at the time of the accident.
Her job is to watch the airspeed. Her job was to watch the instrument panel, and my view is she was fatigued to the point where it's like right here, in your soul dull. I think that's where she was, and he just was not capable. He was just, he should have been flying an airplane.
The revelation leads John Kausner to become a fierce advocate for changes to the industry. He raises awareness among both lawmakers and the public about the need to improve regulations governing pilots at regional airlines.
This is just saying we support 3407 families that fight for aviation safety, and these representatives and congressmen and senators have done that for us, and we're very appreciative.
He takes his fight all the way to Washington, D.C.
We needed to do something, and so we began to advocate in Washington weekly, every other week. I mean, we've made innumerable trips down there, and immediately the families just gelled. We all attended the hearings and began to say, this is what we can do.
The crash of Flight 3407 focused the world's attention on a growing safety problem. The relatives of those who were killed will help eliminate that threat.